Good morning, and welcome to Sacred Heart Church in Southbury. These are different times as we face the crisis of the global coronavirus. And so we offer this morning what we would offer usually at our weekend liturgies: a call to worship, a gospel reading of the day, reflection, and prayer. And so we begin. Today is the fifth Sunday in our Lenten journey. We listen to the story of the man born blind, a story of healing of physical sight and the gift of insight and faith. Sitting in his own darkness, the man blind from birth was probably used to the darkness, comfortable with the movements and the sounds around him, learning to live with a lot of uncertainty and depending on others to live. I couldn't help but think that this in a way describes life as we know it today, with the coronavirus affecting the human family. In meditation, I sat with this man on the side of the road, and I invite you to do the same. Let us meditate together on this passage. If you are comfortable, close your eyes and take a slow, deep breath, finding a place of stillness within, allowing your body to rest, your mind to slow down, your heart to open in peace. Imagine you are sitting on the side of the road with the man who could not see. Begin to know your own particular darkness of this time, knowing that the coronavirus has brought its own darkness. The lack of sight into the future, the worry of illness or financial instability, the care of the ones you love. But the story does not end there. Into this story comes the light of the world. Imagine your image of darkness begins to lift. You begin to feel the warmth of a presence with you. The love of a God who will not leave you alone in darkness, who will be with you every step of the way. Be present to that light. Be present to that love. And know this God with arms open wide to embrace you. Rest for a moment here with the God who loves you so. Breathe in this love. Feel it gently warm every fiber of your being, offering peace, offering hope. Thank God for this moment of time and carry this with you, knowing that you can always return here. When you are ready, take another slow, deep breath, allowing yourself to come back to this time and place, renewed and strengthened for the journey ahead. Amen.
The Lord be with you. A reading of the Holy Gospel according to John. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither he nor his parents sinned. It is so that the works of God may be made visible through him. We have to do the works of the one who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When Jesus had said this, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva and smeared the clay on the man's eyes and said to him, "Go and wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. So the man went and washed and came back able to see. His neighbors and those who had seen him earlier as a beggar said, "Isn't this the man who used to sit and beg?" Some said it is, but others said, "No, it just looks like him." The man said, "I am he." So they said to him, "How were your eyes opened?" The man replied, "The man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and told me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' So I went there and washed and was able to see." And they said to him, "Where is he?" But the man said, "I don't know." They brought the man who had once been blind then to the Pharisees. Now Jesus made clay and opened his eyes on a Sabbath. So the Pharisees also asked him how he was able to see. And he responded, "He put clay on my eyes, and I washed, and now I can see." But some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, because he doesn't keep the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a sinful man do such signs?" And there was division among them. So they said to the blind man again, "What do you have to say about him since he opened your eyes?" And the man said, "He is a prophet." Now the Jews did not believe that he had been blind and gained his sight, until they summoned the parents of the man who had gained his sight. They asked them, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How does he now see?" But the man's parents answered and said, "We know that this is our son, and we know that he was born blind, but we do not know how he sees now, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him. He is of age. He can speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone acknowledged Jesus as the Christ, he would be expelled from the synagogue. And for this reason his parents said, "He is of age, question him." Now a second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner." But the man replied, "If he is a sinner, I don't know. One thing I do know, though, is that I was blind and now I can see." So they said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" The man answered, "I told you already, but you did not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you want to become his disciples too?" And the Pharisees ridiculed the man and said, "You are that man's disciple. We are disciples of Moses. We know that God spoke to Moses, but we do not know where this man comes from." The man answered them and said, "That is what is so amazing, that you don't know where he came from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners. But if one is devout and does God's will, God listens to him. It is unheard of that anyone ever open the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he would not be able to do anything." They answered and said to him, "You were born totally in sin, and you're trying to teach us?" And then they threw the man out of the synagogue. When Jesus heard that he had been thrown out, he found him and said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" The man answered and said, "Who is he, sir, that I may believe in him?" Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." The man said, "I do believe, Lord," and he worshipped him. Then Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see might see, and those who might see become blind." Some of the Pharisees who were there with him heard this, and they said, "Surely we are not also blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would have no sin. But now you are saying, 'We can see,' and so your sin remains." The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ. No doubt you've often heard me say how much I like the stories in the Gospel where an individual person meets and interacts with Jesus. And this Lenten season in a particular way, we're having served up to us by the readings of the church some of the best stories of people meeting Jesus one-on-one. Remember, like last week, we had the Samaritan woman at the well. And this week we have the man born blind. They're both very long Gospels, as probably became kind of clear as I read on and on, page after page. But they are wonderful stories, and they're packed with lots of detail that I think is helpful for us. Because I think it's in the details where we connect with those stories and recognize similarities in our own life and in our own faith. Both of these stories, the Samaritan woman at the well and the man born blind, these people, they have no names. So they're, like we see in literature, they would be like every man or every woman, which means they're like you and I. Which means you and I can be drawn into those stories and see where this fits, or where I recognize familiar tones from my own journey of faith. In this week's Gospel of the man born blind, there's a very clear progression in how this man comes to faith. And it all starts from the unique, concrete, very real circumstances of his life right there, right then. He's a man born blind. As a result, he's viewed, for instance, as either being a sinner himself or having ancestors who were sinners. That's where his blindness came from. As the Jews of that era used to always attribute any suffering or trauma or difficulty or struggle or illness to sin somewhere in the person's family line, if not in the person's life themselves. As a result of that, he had to beg. He couldn't get a job in any other way, and he wasn't allowed to really socialize, whether in the marketplace or at the synagogue or whatever. So his blindness was more than just a problem of seeing. His blindness really affected all the elements of his life, all the dimensions of his life. As the story starts out, it's clear he doesn't know who Jesus is. He has no idea about who this Jesus is. And yet, somehow, other people standing on the road, either the disciples of Jesus or the Pharisees, the gospel isn't clear, point to this man. And they said, "Rabbi," trying to, again, ask those questions that people were always throwing at the rabbis in the days of Jesus. Why is this man unable to see? Did he sin, or is it the sin of his parents, or whatever? And Jesus right away says, that doesn't hold here. That doesn't hold at all. In fact, his blindness is going to be a way for God's glory to be seen. For people, in other words, to recognize that God really is with them. And so he does, and again, I'm struck how earthy this is. He spits on the dirt of the road and makes mud, and then takes that mud and physically touches the man's eyes with the mud. It's an earthy miracle that Jesus does. Not some spiritual hocus pocus. No, he just puts mud on his eyes. And the man goes and washes according to Jesus' instructions in the pool of Siloam, and he comes back able to see. So he comes back, and the people start to ask, how can you see again? And notice how he refers to Jesus. That man called Jesus, kind of anonymous. He's not claiming anything to know about Jesus, other than that man called Jesus, put mud on my eyes, told me to go wash and so on, and now I can see. So his sense of his relationship with Jesus moved a step beyond just not having any idea who he was. Now he knows his name. After that, they bring him to the Pharisees. And the Pharisees again ask, well, how did you come to see? And he says, Jesus put mud on his eyes, washed and so on, he can see again. And the Pharisees can't understand that. And they ask him, well, where is this man? The man says, I don't know where he is. I don't know where he is. Again, you don't get a sense of a strong connection between the blind man and Jesus who gave him his sight. Then afterwards, they decide they needed to bring his parents in because they weren't getting too far with him. They bring the parents in and they said, is this your son who used to be blind? And you can almost see the sense of terror on the faces of his mother and father. Yeah, he's our son, and he was born blind, but I don't know how he sees now. And the gospel writer's real clear. They didn't want to be thrown out of the synagogue. They didn't want to be expelled from the community of that small town and what must have been a small synagogue there. So they just back off. They say, he's old enough, he can talk by himself. And so that drives the Pharisees back to the man again. Tell us, who's this man that did this for you? And how did he help you to come to see again? And he can't be a man from God because he didn't keep the Sabbath. There's a problem there. He worked on the Sabbath. Evidently, making mud with dirt and spittle is work in that definition. So they said he couldn't be a person from God. He couldn't be a holy man. And the man says, I don't know anything about that. I just know that I was blind and now I can see again. That this man made a difference in my life. And goodness, very wise insight on the part of the man born blind. Goodness doesn't, come from people who are aligned with the ways of sin. Goodness comes from God. And they get so fired up and angry at him that they throw him out of the synagogue. So he's done. Then I think one of the most powerful parts of this story that sometimes gets lost in the long telling of the tale is that Jesus goes looking for him. He didn't go looking for Jesus. Jesus heard what was going on and went looking for him. Jesus sought him out and says to him, do you believe? Do you believe in the Son of Man? And the man says, well, tell me who he is. He said, you've talked to him. He's the one that's talking to you now. And in the words of the writers of the gospel, he acknowledged that Jesus is the Son of Man, which was a title that indicated he was the long-awaited one. He was the one who was going to bring salvation to Israel. And then at the end, of course, the Pharisees are listening in, and they don't like what's going on in this conversation, and they're quite put off by it. And Jesus makes it really clear that what he's come to do is to bring light, is to enable people to see, enable people to look at the circumstances of their lives and the happenings of their life and see the hand of God. A God who loves them, a God who goes out of his way to seek them and to help them as best he can. And that really the Pharisees are blinded to that for one reason or another. It's a wonderful, wonderful story, once again, as this unknown man, unnamed in the gospel, comes to sight. And that experience of his growing in faith from, I don't know who he is, I don't know where he is, he's a prophet, he must be from God, He's the Son of Man. That whole progression in faith comes from the God whom he met, wrapped up in the circumstances of his everyday life. Now, all of us are tied up these days in what truly might be called extraordinary circumstances. I have heard more people say, I've never had an experience like this in my life, where something so radically affected all the dimensions of my life. The concerns over this coronavirus really have settled in, and they present themselves, especially as we listen to this gospel text this weekend, they present themselves as something that we need to pay attention to. How is God being present here? How is God being present to me in these circumstances? One of my old tried and true principles that I go back to a lot is that God is always faithful. God is always faithful. And once you presuppose that, once you say, I believe that, then you look at the circumstances of your life in different ways and are open to see, to use the image of the gospel, are open to see the presence and the power of God's faithful love, working somehow even in extraordinary circumstances. And so the question is not where is God, but how is God being faithful to me now? How is God being faithful to us now? I'd like to just throw out one possibility. A writer recently noted how people are being drawn together and to care about one another. They talked about the pictures of those Italian people singing out of their windows, even though they've been in quarantine and so much of their life has changed. They talked about people reaching out and being concerned about the poor and the needy and giving a hand to their neighbor or calling up elderly relatives or friends just to make sure they're all right. Can we be open enough to not be so overwhelmed by the fear and anxiety that easily comes with the situation, and open to how God's power, God's love, and God's mercy are at work in all of us? But the key is, you have to be able to see it. You have to be able to see with the vision that our faith in Jesus Christ gives us. May we all find peace and assurance. The assurance of God's love and mercy for us and for all people. The response of God to the prayers that we all raise up, especially those prayers that you may have sent in to our parish for our prayer of the faithful. May we all find peace and assurance of God's love and faithfulness, even in these unique circumstances. And like the man in the gospel, may we be able to see it.